Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the latest edition to the Opening Bell. Coming up this week, we will leaf through all the news lines, which include a bit of WBC Shakur fallout after his win. Mayweather in the news as well with a huge lawsuit. We're going to talk about Nick Ball losing his title to Brandon Figueroa in a stirring contest at the weekend. We'll reflect on that Liverpool bill. And we delve into the archives from the early 2000s for the night that really sent Rafa Marquez, brother of Juan Manuel, on his career trajectory, taking on longtime belt holder Tim Austin in a fight from 2003. So all of that coming up this week on the Opening Bell pod. Lots to get our teeth into once again. Matt Christie, how's life?
It's a roller coaster, Alex, but you just got to keep riding it. It's a roller coaster, mate. But what can you do? Maris Piper. I went for Maris Piper potatoes on Sunday. I had more than one person come out and approach me regarding my potato choice. So I went back to the Maris Piper. And do you know why I went for the Maris Piper as opposed to the King Edwards? Is because the Maris Piper, with the Maris Piper, you get bigger ones. You get bigger potatoes. With the King Edwards, what annoys me is that I can't go somewhere and get single King Edwards and choose just big ones. I'm not a big fan of the peeling process. So if you just got 5 or 6 big ones to peel as opposed to 15 little ones, it's just a far easier thing. But they were better. The Maris Piper were better than the Nemos. So I'm back on the I'm back on the old classical route with roast potatoes.
We're slowly getting there, folks. We're slowly getting to roast potato perfection on the Opening Bell. Good. We've had a house of colds. What goes up must come down, it seems, after the Dublin extravaganza. We've got a house of colds this week. Yeah, no good. No good. No good. Let's talk about the news lines then, shall we? This Mayweather lawsuit is in the news, the wider news, sporting news, and certainly in the boxing news in the last couple of weeks. And that is a reported $340 million black hole stroke lawsuit that Mayweather is filing towards Showtime and Stephen Espinosa in particular, which makes you wonder whether Mayweather might have settled already out of court with Al Heyman, for whom much of this surrounds and focuses upon in one way or another. What do you make? I've not read all of it yet. I've just read bits and pieces. And obviously, it's, as is the case with these things, at the moment, we're only being presented with one side of the story, and that usually is going to be the most extreme version that you're going to see. So it's still got to be played out. Whether it gets to court, how it gets to court, when it gets to court, how that plays out. But fascinating stuff, Matt. Another storyline that we didn't necessarily expect. And it'll have a lot of fans wondering, of course, because they've had dollar bills rubbed in their faces for years and years and years by Floyd Mayweather. And here it is that we're led to believe he's actually on his way to being skinned. What do you make of it?
It's not a huge surprise, is it? I mean, when you live in the life that Floyd Mayweather does, and to say it's extravagant lifestyle would be an understatement. Private jets. You now and again see him post his bet slips, which he will only post when he's won them, and they are an obscene amount of money that he is placing. So anybody that has had a little flutter from time to time will tell you that it's an impossibility to win every time. So one could only imagine how much money is lost down that particular road as well. It does on the surface appear to scream that I am broke and I need to find a way to get some money back, and I need to get enough money to live the life that I've become accustomed to. I don't know enough about it on both sides to offer an opinion on whether I think Mayweather has got a case or not. It's exceptionally surprising given how Mayweather championed Al Heyman during the last few years of his career. I'll never forget being at the Mayweather Pacquiao post-fight press conference, and Mayweather is brandishing his check that he got, which from memory was something like $200 million or something insane. but he clearly needs money. And I suppose the question is, if you feel like you've been cheated out of all of this money, why is it taking until now to do something about it? But we wait and see, don't we, what happens. Mayweather was always really, really clever when he was a fighter in terms of the best platform to go to. He was fiercely independent towards the end. But, you know, when you're living like that, sometimes all the money in the world isn't enough. So it does seem to me that he's trying to get some kind of payday to set him up for life.
Or worst case scenario, it hints at how you can never trust absolutely anybody or everybody in this sport, maybe in wider life, full stop. It could, if the lawsuit is to be believed, then that's what it's hinting at, that you can never trust even those that you have absolute trust in. And Matt's right. You know, in every post-fight Mayweather interview, it was God, Al Heyman who were thanked. And by the way, not necessarily in that order. Almost always.
It's true. It's true. There was no hint of any kind of bad feeling between the two of them. And given, and again, this is me kind of being a little bit judgmental, because as much as I was bewitched and admired watching Floyd Mayweather, by the end of his career, his press conferences and dealing with him behind the scenes just became a bit of an ordeal. He was not the kind of person that I would want to hang around with, not even for 2 minutes. But given how much attention he was paying to the bottom line at that particular point, or he appeared to be paying to the bottom line at that during those final years of his career, it is a surprise to me that something like this will have gone on. Let's be honest, though, that also there must be something there for it to have gotten this far. So there must be a case of sorts to answer to, whether it's to the tune of over $300 million. I'd be really surprised.
Yes, indeed. From some of the files and pieces that I've read, there are reportedly some files, bits of evidence that could support that one way or another that appear to have gone missing. So, and the explanations for that about floods and et cetera, et cetera. So that there's vagary about that. There's also really interesting few paragraphs relating to around 23, 24. Al Heyman had a stroke in 23, and around that time, then into 24, there were, I think, something like 5 lawyers who were working with him and on behalf of Mayweather, or joining the two, who left within a 3-month period of time. So there's some bits and pieces there that don't add up and hint at a wider story, but we're only going to get to that if indeed it does go further through the law courts, and that could be very, very expensive. So it's going to be fascinating to watch it play out. There will be plenty of boxing fans who just fear the worst kind of ever recycling story in sport, and boxing in particular, of fighters. And if someone who navigated his career so savvily as Floyd Mayweather, who took control of his own career in such an independent, spirited and direct way, buying out his contract from Top Rank, pursuing his own very much clear ideals and goals that no one at Top Rank, Bob Arum in particular, just couldn't understand. But Mayweather saw the future. He saw his own future. So if even someone like him has possibly gone skint, then it is one of the oldest tales of boxing being retold again, and probably one of the worst examples. If.
Yeah, well, it's exactly, if he has gone skint. I think there's a line within the lawsuit, isn't there, that it's kind of tries to say that he's not skint. and any insinuation that he is has really damaged him psychologically and what have you, which is
his brand,
which is quite depressing when you think of what Mayweather was 10 years ago, kind of this invincible man who had reshaped the whole of the boxing landscape with the way that he chose to orchestrate his career. But yeah, you go back, you look at Jack Johnson, Joe Louis, Sugar Ray Robinson, even Muhammad Ali went through a period where he didn't know where his next dollar was coming from. Yeah, as I say, I mean, I don't know, but having seen Floyd Mayweather show off his wealth over the last few years, it wouldn't be a surprise to me in the slightest if he was really struggling now financially. Evander Holyfield, you think of all of these, the list goes on and on. They keep coming to mind. Mike Tyson, not so long ago, again, struggling financially.
Mad. Absolutely mad. Although, obviously, he had his own links and demon in Don King, didn't he? So that one's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. We spoke about Shakur just the other week, and there's been a bit of fallout subsequently regarding his title, which he had at 135 pounds. Of course, he was WBC world champion at lightweight. He fought for Teo Lopez's 140-pound belt, but that was with the WBO, so a differing sanctioning body. And because of the WBC rules, you need special dispensation to pursue that, and therefore to do that, you still have to pay them a sanctioning fee. I think it's 1.5% or in the neighborhood of that, which Shakur isn't prepared to do. Anyway, what it means is he's losing his title. It brings together again, Matt, some of the conflicts that are at play now, and I think a growing sense that what part, how should it look, the sport, whether it involves the sanctioning bodies or not, and maybe more fighters, particularly as they go higher up the food chain, starting to question what these sanctioning fees are for, the amount of money they're paying, and whether it's remotely worth it. What you would say is the WBC have categorically, clearly followed their own rules to the letter on this. So they're not playing out and acting out of turn. This is exactly within their own rules structure, but it certainly does highlight a lot of the things we've been discussing on the pod, and it's I suppose shining a bit of a light more on that for fans and certainly for fighters as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's you kind of wonder if Terence Crawford's outburst in December, where he kind of was irate with the WBC for the sanctioning fees that he was being asked to pay, and relinquished his belt and retired shortly afterwards. I personally think that the rules are terrible, that they have to pay that amount of money if they want to challenge for another belt, but they are the rules that all of the fighters are aware of. And there is a little part of me, I kind of just think, well, what's been wrong with everybody until this point? This has been no secret. The sanction fees have been no secret. I've written about it numerous times. What are they for? Break down exactly what those sanctioning fees are for. Now, I've said before, in regards to WBC, out of all of the sanctioning bodies, the WBC are the group that I've been most familiar with and spent the most time with. And I have seen that they do an awful lot. They do an awful lot with the sanctioning fees, and it isn't just going in Mauricio's pocket so he can go out to an expensive restaurant every night or buy a bigger house. It's not. Mauricio Sulaiman genuinely is trying to do the best he possibly can as one of the most influential people in the sport. But I also think he's a bit misguided about certain things. But for me, I almost think, what's at last, are we all waking up now to this? And you look at what Dana White is supposedly doing with Zuffa and presenting an alternative. This is what I've said for years. You don't need someone to come in and buy out the sanctioning bodies. You just need to show the sport how moronic it's been for so long. and present them with an alternative. And all of a sudden now you're starting to hear different voices come forward. But then you look at the kind of more established people within the sport, whether that's your Frank Warrens, your Eddie Hearns, your Bob Arams, your Oscar De La Hoyas, and they're all of a sudden, hang on a minute, sanctioning bodies are great. Or the sanctioning bodies are part of the sport. It allows the fighter to develop. There's a system there which will see the fighter develop through the rankings. We know what we have to do to get a fighter up through the rankings. But I also remember having that conversation with Eddie Hearn, the one that you reference frequently, when he made the front cover of Boxing News, when he was essentially saying he wanted to take over the sport. And there's a line in there where I was asking him, because I'd made the decision at Boxing News the year or so before to say, we're not going to recognise the sanctioning bodies anymore because they are harming the sport. And I put a question along with that in mind to Eddie Hearn. And he said, well, I could create a matchroom belt. I could do that if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do it. Now Dana White has essentially come in and gone, actually, I've been looking on the outside for ages, and this whole system is screwed. And you just wonder if some of these people are going, oh my God, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't we do this? Why didn't we recognise that there was a problem here? I think certain sanctioning bodies do an awful lot of good for the sport. But I think 4 sanctioning bodies, all recognising different people as champions in the same division, creating nonsensical titles, charging sanctioning fees, is a practice that is on its way out. I think it is on its way out. I think that we are kind of living through this moment in sport, in the sport of boxing, which is a huge sea change. And we're just at the start of it. And when they're writing the history books in 50 years' time, the 4-belt era that people choose to champion now and again because it suits a certain narrative will not be looked upon as one of the greatest eras in the sport of boxing. You'll be looking back on it going, what on earth were they doing at that point? I think we're on the way out.
And by the way, the fighters and the promoters are all guilty of hypocrisy on this. You know, Shakur's happy to use those titles on his way up till he gets to a position where he's able to pick and choose. And Terence Crawford waited until he was almost certainly about to or had decided to retire before he starts shooting guns out of the holsters. He wasn't doing it before when he was on the way up, when he wanted unification fights, when he wanted to establish his brand or further his own career. And Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, or whoever, you know, Frank was happy to be going after the WBU to get Ricky Hatton's career rolling back in the 2000s. He was one of the first to go with the WBO. And by the way, I mentioned this way back when. Emmanuel Stewart is one of the people who put money in his pocket to get the WBO on its charge way back when. So everyone's complicit in one way or another. Everyone's guilty of hypocrisy. Almost certainly, mostly everyone in one way or another who've attached themselves to the sport. There's no doubt about it. But we are at a point now, and it only takes one or two, a Terence Crawford, a Shakur, and then say the influence of Dana White and TKO and Zuffa, and suddenly fans start to think about it a bit more. Maybe streaming and TV execs will think less about having titles on and this title on and this title on. So there's no doubt we are at a point, but there's hypocrisy floating all over the gaff as well.
Well, there is. And it all comes down to one thing, doesn't it? As it does in almost every facet of life. And that is the bottom line. It's money. And you're not going to see Josh Kelly, for example, or Dalton Smith, 2 recent examples of fighters where they, at the moment, will probably think that those belts have changed their life. They're all of a sudden getting far more exposure than they would have been had they not won sanctioning body titles. At this point in their career, both of those titles are crucial to their development. But it's funny, isn't it, when you very rarely hear a fighter complain about sanctioning fees until they are earning an outrageous amount of money. And it's very, you could also, and this isn't just, as I say, this isn't just fighters, it's people that are asked to pay taxes or are asked to pay anything, or in boxing are asked to pay a trainer. The boxer on the way up with a trainer is always happy to give them whatever they've agreed, whether it's 10% or whatever it is. But all of a sudden, when they start earning millions, that 10% looks huge. And they're like, why should I give them that? And I think it's a very, very similar thing here. Nothing was hidden away. No policies have been changed to harm the boxer or to rob the boxer all of a sudden now that they're doing well. It's what they've been complicit with throughout their career. But they get to a point, and I understand it, completely understand it. And you're looking, hang on a minute, that's an awful lot of money I'm handing over to a sanctioning body. But you also then, who really has been policing the policies of the sanctioning bodies for all these years? And I can completely understand Rich O'Sullivan's point of view, or more or less going, well, what's wrong with you? This is clear as day. This is the agreement we've always had. Why are you turning on us now?
Fascinating to see how it all plays out. And with that in mind, Lewis Crocker, they've been sort of trying to get Lewis Crocker a big home fight, it seemed. Talk of Conor Walker. But Liam Powell is in line for that. And No Limits Boxing, his backers have won the purse bids for that IBF title fight. And it's going to be Crocker Powell, we think, in early March, possibly March the 5th, although that's yet to be confirmed. And this match is essentially just the IBF, who out of their own sort of, their own controversies and mismanagements and financial shenanigans linked to Don King, almost certainly back in the 1980s, out of all of that chaos has come perhaps the most stickly and stickler of the boxing organizations, of the sanctioning bodies for their own rules. And so it is with Crocker, who's having to go now to Australia to fight Liam Powell. That's going to be a tricky fight. It's away from home. It's not the big homecoming he wanted for his first defence. He'll probably be getting paid handsomely enough for it, having to go down to Australia. But yeah, it's not the fight that many fans wanted. Probably not the fight that Crocker wanted. But with Paddy Donovan injured and therefore not able to take part in an eliminator with Powell, Powell's been jettisoned into the mandatory position, which means Crocker has to take that fight. And now, because of the purse bids victory elsewhere, he's had to take that fight down under.
Yeah, he has, and ultimately the No Limits won the purse bid, and they will stage the fight. And I think we're just essentially waiting on some T's to be crossed, and I's to be dotted, and yeah, it will be announced that it will take place in early March. It's a decent fight. Paro, you could argue, is worthy of a title shot. And I think you're right to identify the IBF. I think the IBF have come under fire in recent years, particularly for when they will. We wait years and years for an undisputed champion to come along, and then all of a sudden you're then waiting to see who the IBF are going to say that, well, you've got to fight this person, otherwise we're going to strip you. And unfortunately, this should highlight the problem with having so many sanctioning bodies, because sanctioning bodies very rarely will have the same mandatory, or if somebody is making a beeline for one particular title, another sanctioning body will go, well, you're not fighting for our title then, and remove them from the rankings. You have these completely undeserving fighters in mandatory positions. One only has to look at what's going on with Dimitri Bivol at the moment, and they're trying to get his next fight resolved. Is that you have certain fighters that otherwise, if there was not so many sanctioning bodies, you wouldn't have them in mandatory positions, and you wouldn't have them in world title fights. We'll talk about Tim Austin a little bit later, won't we? Who was champion for several years. And then you look at his record, and you could say he's lived an exceptionally sheltered life as a champion during the course of 10 defenses. And that is purely because of the amount of sanctioning bodies.
Big shout out to NAS Medical Limited, by the way, backing and supporting the opening bell. NAS Medical specialise in complete medical coverage for boxing events, including fight night, ringside medical care, ringside medicine training courses, and also expert second opinions on all aspects of boxing-related medical matters. Boxer safety is their priority. You can find them on Instagram at NAS Medical Limited or www.nasmedical.co.uk. Thanks to NAS Medical Limited for supporting the pod. And if you want to sponsor, you can do so. Get in touch with us. And if you want to follow us via Patreon, you could do that on the app or on the website as well for less than £5 a month. Keep the OB charging forward in the spirit of boxing. That's what we say. So early March, maybe Crocker against Paro. And early April for the first MVP stroke Sky linked bill. Now, that's going to be a congested period, Matt, isn't it? Because 11th of April is supposed to be Fury returning. The week before is Chisora against Wilder. That's on the Saturday at the O2. On the Sunday is the first MVP Most Valuable Promotions, Jake Paul and his crew, putting on a bill alongside Sky TV. Caroline Dubois against Terry Harper, Ellie Scottney, Chantel Cameron, both in action on that bill as well. But the day before, we've got Chisora against Wilder. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, what a contrast with those two bills, the Chisora Wilder and then the MVP bill. MVP bill is a really solid one. I think the discussions about a long-term deal with Sky Sports are kind of ongoing. I know Tom Ivers spoke to Nikisa at MVP this week, and they've said that they're kind of keen to build the women's side of the sport in the UK and in the US, and that is what they're committed to. They haven't really got any interest at the moment in pursuing the men's side of things, apart from Jake Paul. There's talk about Jake Paul coming over and fighting in London. So you kind of wonder there what kind of Sky Sports' output is going to look like if MVP is the only promoter they decide to go with. But I think it's terrific to have Sky Sports back in boxing. I think people really underestimate what a promotional machine that is for the sport. And I think we as a sport have missed them. I know there's certain people there that are still working really hard behind the scenes at Sky Sports, still very, very passionate about boxing and have really been waiting to get their teeth stuck into the sport again. But I'm really, really happy that Sky Sports is involved in boxing again. But yeah, it's going to be a busy old weekend. You're going to have looking through your fingers at Deontay Wilder and Derek Chisora. And then the next day on the Sunday afternoon, once you've finished with your Maris Pipers, you've got a really solid bill there with four world title fights. Ellie Scottney is probably I think the Ellie Scottney fight is the best one on there. Dubois against Harper, I think a couple of years ago would have been really intriguing. Not sure where Harper is now in her career. If she can somehow rediscover her best, that's a terrific fight with Caroline Dubois. But one suspects that Harper, she might have seen better days, but she surprised us in the past. There's no reason to say that she won't do so again. But it's a really solid bill.
And what about the idea? We spoke last week, didn't we, about promoters viewing each other as competitors and single-mindedly pursuing their own goals, even although we can huff and puff and look at the small-mindedness, the selfishness of it, and wonder about the bigger picture and the greater good for the sport. What about those two things happening literally within 24 hours of each other?
I've got no real issue with it when it's two events over the course of a weekend taking place in the same city. I do think, however, it's asking an awful lot when you have 3 or 4 events taking place over the course of a weekend, when you want people to be paying through the door, you want people to be sat there in the arena, creating the atmosphere, making boxing look wonderful. What frustrates me, or what used to frustrate me years ago, when I was looking at the small hall schedule every single week, and sometimes you'd have 3 events taking place on the same night in London. You'd have 2 events taking place at exactly the same time in Manchester, and you think on the one hand, yes, we can say, well, last weekend there was 14 cards, but on the other, how many of those made any money? How many of those got people through the door? And I think when you're asking people to make a choice on the same night in the same place, you're eating yourself. You're being stupid. But I don't necessarily think that's the case here. You could also argue as well that the audiences for the women's show and for Deontay Wilder versus Derek Chisora are completely different. You know, if you want to go and get drunk and have a fight in the stands, go and watch Deontay Wilder versus Derek Chisora. If you want to go and take your daughter, for example, to go and see some quality boxing, take her to the show on the Sunday.
I think that's a fair point, and some people might question that, but yeah, I do think that's a fair point. I think they are slightly different audiences, and you only have to speak to anyone who went to that all women's boxing card back in, what was it, 22, with Savannah Marshall, Clarissa Shields, Baumgardner, Mayer. Anyone who went to that spoke glowingly about the atmosphere and the crowd, and the fact that there were lots of parents with daughters, sons, etc., etc. It was a different crowd. So I think that is a fair point to make regarding that, and hopefully that's the case. Then there'll be something for everyone over that weekend, and they're not necessarily impacting upon each other at the box office one way or another. Finishing on the news lines, Matt, on a lighter note, did you enjoy Jarrell Miller's toupee the other week?
Yeah, I did. I enjoyed it enormously. I really did. You know, I mean, you can get banging wigs. You can get absolutely incredible wigs these days, which now and again do appear on my social media feeds for some reason. And you look at them and you think, wow. But then you see what happened to Jarrell Miller's, and you just think, come on, just own it. Just own the head you've got. Just own it. And his excuse afterwards, oh God, yeah, well, this happened 2 days ago, and I was at my sister's house, and I mistook the shampoo for a bottle of bleach. So I needed to get my I needed to get some hair on my head. Right. Okay. Maybe that is true. Maybe he did use the wrong shampoo and it burnt through his entire hairline. Or maybe he's been struggling with it for many years, and up until that moment, the glued-on toupee was the solution. We're all different, but Jarrell, big baby, I'm sure you listen to this podcast. From one balding man to another, the best way forward is to get the razor blades out and make the most of what you've got. And the moment that you can come to terms with that is when your life will be a lot more carefree, my friend.
Embrace. Yeah, nothing funnier than a 300-pound man, 300-pound heavyweight, big, rough, tough heavyweight, and his hairpiece falling off in a fight. Nothing better.
Do you know what, though? And I did write something for Boxing Scene in the days after it. Poor old Jarrell Miller, previously known as best known for failing drug tests And now, unless he does something supersonic in his career, manages to win a belt, snares a fight with Alexander Usyk and scores the upset of all time, he will always be known as the man who had his week punched off in a fight.
Yeah, well, the two things that are going to follow him for the rest of his life: one of the most extravagant failed drugs tests in boxing history, and your jam fig dislodging from a punch in a fight.
Jam fig.
Yeah, those are following. Those are with you, mate. And some will say, richly deserved. Richly deserved. Let's talk about the fighting from the weekend. Liverpool, Nick Ball Figueroa didn't really disappoint, though didn't necessarily evolve into the absolute infighting firefight that we were kind of hoping for. And that's largely because, and actually we should have mentioned it last week, because the last couple of fights, Nick Ball has been a bit more thoughtful in his work, a bit more standoff before he explodes into attacks. And there has been a bit more method, not quite the firebomb fizzler attack that we kind of got used to on the way up from Nick Ball. It has been much more measured in his last couple of fights. And against Figueroa, who with that 7-inch reach advantage and height advantage to match, just wants to be on the inside. He's not a guy that wants to use his advantages in any way whatsoever. I must admit, Matt, I thought it was a close competitive fight, slightly surprised by the scorecards as they were in favour of Figueroa. I had them the other way for Nick Ball personally down the stretch. So I think we would have been dealing with a scoring controversy had Figueroa not scored a knockdown, not scored the knockout so late on. And I must admit, I didn't see it coming at all, but it came late on in the very last round.
Yeah, it was a sudden ending. It wasn't so unexpected. I think I could see Nick Ball struggling in a way that I hadn't seen him struggle so early in a contest, and I can only imagine what it's like to fight someone like Brandon Figueroa, this relentless, spidery kind of creature that just doesn't stop and is very difficult to read, even though he's not the most cultured fighter, shall we say, when you're doing the eye test. Stephen Breadman Edwards always calls it the eye test, in terms of he can see immediately when he's got someone in the gym with him, whether it's for 5 minutes or when he's been told to look at a fighter on the television. He can just see immediately if they have got kind of everything. And you don't see that with Brandon Figueroa. And I think you and I have spoke about it before. Many years ago, we spoke about it with Brandon Figueroa. He's one of those fighters that I'd imagine that if you're preparing to fight him, you will pinpoint so many errors that he's making that you think all you've got to do is stay on point and you will win that fight. But Figueroa brings something from deep within inside, something unteachable. And he has got a will to win. That is exactly the reason why that was the third world belt that he picked up at the weekend. And I must admit, when the fight was made, your instinct is, well, that's Figueroa's kind of been there and done it with top level competition for so long now. Surely you'll beat Nick Ball. But then you look again at the Brandon Figueroa's recent performances and you think, no, he's had a tough old career. Someone like that will kind of grow old. And you could see why that fight was made. It was, to the hardcore fan, beating Brandon Figueroa would have been a massive launch pad for Nick Ball. Full credit to Nick Ball for the effort that he put forth. I thought he was really close going into the last round. Tom Ivers, who was ringside for Boxing Scene, and he'd spent time with both of the fighters early on, sent me a text message. I think it was around the 5th or the 6th, and he went, Ball is already struggling here. And he was up close. He could kind of see it. And Tom is, he was a amateur boxer to a decent level. He reads a fight really well, and he was texting me saying, Ball's got problems. But Ball was overcoming them to a certain degree. But Figueroa got there. What a finish it was as well. I mean, the shot that put ball down face first, heck of a shot to find in the 12th round.
Yeah, usually Nick Ball was beating him to the punch, wasn't he, repeatedly? It's kind of what we said last week. That speed looked to me like it was the difference. Listen, there was close rounds, 1, 3, 4, 5, 8, real splitters. I just think when you're scoring a fight like that, to my eye, how effective was Brandon Figueroa being? I know there was some sneaky body shots in there repeatedly throughout, but how effective was he being? I thought Nick Ball was controlling the action. He's beating him to the punch. But then the one time that Figueroa beats Ball to the punch, when Nick Ball was trying to throw a right hand, he gets there first with a left. And that was pretty much it. Fight changer. Although on the cards, he was 3 rounds up anyway on 2 of the 3. Nick Ball 5 up on the other card. So it shows you the discrepancy and maybe the difficulty in scoring a fight like that. But either way, the cards were redundant because Figueroa, having landed that big left hand, then it was the follow-up barrage and Nick Ball was already spent and there wasn't even a significantly forceful or big connecting punch, wasn't it? It was just a sequence, and I think the damage had already been done, Matt. He went down again, but I think it was that first left hand that really did it.
It was, and it was kind of unsighted. He wasn't bracing for it. Nick Ball, we've marveled at his engine. We've kind of quite rightly said he's proved himself to be a really durable fighter. But again, this is another example of any fighter, if they get hit in the right place, in the right way, then they can go. And Nick Ball went straight down there. And I think maybe if it had come earlier on in the fight, it wouldn't have had the same effect. But I think that, coupled with the fact that he was throwing his own shot carelessly at the time, wasn't ready for a return at all. And it came out of nowhere for him. He wasn't ready for it, and down he went.
Really interested in that Tom Ivor a reflection from ringside, because it's something that's occurred to me in the last couple of fights, and it was more present watching this one against Figueroa. And obviously against Figueroa, I think is always going to exaggerate it. But the fact that, Nick Ball, mouth open from a relatively early stage. And I think because of his size, short, stocky, quite muscular, and I think because of the way he's always fighting bigger guys generally, he's quite small. He's quite small and stocky and muscular for a featherweight. And because of the fact he's got that stature and physique, because he's generally fighting guys who are bigger than him, and because he is quite explosive, isn't he? He puts a lot into his punches in those little short bursts. I think he uses up a lot of energy. And I think against Figueroa, that's a difficult thing to sustain. Now, it almost sustained him through to the end and to the cards. But I'm interested in that point from Tom, because, he's saying he's noticing him starting to struggle and have difficulty from the 5th. And that is something that I'd sort of just picked up from Ball before. And it became more of a klaxon watching that fight unfold. He's so sneaky, isn't he, Figueroa? He doesn't seem to put anything on his punches. There's the sneaky body shots, but he is constantly there. And he's a bit of a conundrum, isn't he? Because I thought through the majority of that fight, he looked slow. He was getting beaten to the punch. He looks so beatable. But there's obviously a lot of stuff that he's constantly doing, chipping away. And eventually he got his reward.
Well, the word there is constant. He's constantly on it. He's constantly doing something. He won't allow his opponents to take a breather. I think even though you look at him and you think, well, that's not the textbook way to throw that shot. That's not the way to move your feet after you've done that. But I think as a consequence of that, he's really difficult to read. Boxers will tell you that sometimes, you might get this maniac walk into the gym and they'll come in and they'll be flinging their arms, and it's just all so unexpected. It takes them a little while to work out what they're doing. And whereas another boxer comes in and you can kind of read or guess what they might do next. But with Figueroa, you don't know what he's going to do next. It's all kind of it's not from the rule book, and you now and again see fighters like that, which are the word that you would use is they're effective. They're not gifted, they're not talented, they're effective. And Brandon Figueroa is so effective, and particularly I think now with the hindsight, looking at the style of Nick Ball, the build of Nick Ball, the height of Nick Ball, the way Nick Ball fights, the longer the fight went on, the greater chance of victory that Brandon Figueroa had. And as you say, we've seen Nick Ball come on strong in the second half of fights before. We've said he's just got an he's so relentless. But against someone like Figueroa, as hard as you've trained and as good as your stamina is, in the same way that no chin is impenetrable, there's no gas tank that is just going to keep filling up. Eventually, you're going to run out of energy. And it was I would imagine, not just physically for Nick Ball, but psychologically, he was taking stuff out of himself. And in the end, he got the job done. If they arrange a rematch, an immediate rematch for a few months' time, I most certainly wouldn't sit here and say to you, "Well, Nick Ball's got no chance in that." For all the reasons that you've already explained, Nick Ball was doing well to a degree, but to me, he never looked like he was in control. I wouldn't have any argument that if those knockdowns hadn't have occurred and he'd have made it to the last bell, he'd have won a razor-tight decision. I would have had any argument with it, but he was working so hard every second of that fight to essentially have some semblance of being in the fight for me. Whereas with Figueroa, it was just a little bit more natural. Strange old fighter to analyze, Brandon Figueroa.
Yeah, he is. I would have this fight as a case study on scoring fights for both for both judges and for fans. I'd have this fight as a case study. And I think it'd be a really interesting one, because I think there's a real question about how effective on the cards Figueroa was. In the fight, that's a different thing entirely. That's a different discussion entirely. But on the cards, I'd have a big issue about how effective Figueroa was in scoring rounds. The difficulty here is you had 1, 3, 4, 5, and 8, to my eye, were difficult to score. And also within this fight, what you had was seesaw swings. You had one fighter have a good minute and then another fighter, say, have a good finish. And so you had a balance of action at two different ends of one round repeatedly, which made it a bit more difficult to score. So I would have this fight as a case study on how to score fights for both the judges and for fans, because I think it's a really fascinating one in that regard. And I think it's an easy fight to get wrong. Easy fight to get wrong.
I was talking to Gary Jonas of Pro Box and owner of Boxing Scene a couple of weeks ago about scoring, and he made a point that that shouldn't be a eureka moment for everybody. But he says that we're watching at home. There's a reason why the angle keeps changing when we're watching at home. It's because the angle we were previously watching on, you can't see, you're not getting a good view. Whereas you've got these judges that are all in the same spot. There is bound to be huge blind spots for them during sections of rounds where they have got either the fighters on top of them, they can't see what's going on behind the back. And I think it's really interesting with a fight like this where you've got two judges who had Figueroa 3 points up and the other one, which is in a massive swing the other way, 5 points for Nick Ball. So, ultimately these scorecards, we spoke too long about them. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But I think it's really interesting in that this is the way that we've been judging for a long time. And is there a different way to do it? Because really, you've got the three judges at ringside, and each of them, for large portions of the contest, particularly one like this where they're so close up and it's so frenetic on the inside, there's large portions of the round where they can't see what they need to see to make the decision to say who's won the round.
Nearly a riot afterwards. Very nearly a riot there afterwards. Obviously, let's say come from behind nature of the win for the purpose of the discussion, but the late swing or the late stoppage, that played a part. That heightens tensions, emotions, passions. One of Figueroa's team, they all jumped in the ring afterwards to celebrate, but one of them went across to the other side of the ring to where George Warren and Ball's family and supporters were, and kind of celebrated, leaning over the ropes, gesticulating wildly. One off that team. That was very brief, and then returned more towards Figueroa, where Manny Robles, Figueroa, and the rest of the team were celebrating. Now, part of that sort of heightened celebration and stepping over the line is to do with the nature of the late stoppage. Part of it is to do, I think, Matt, with a controversy regarding the hand wrapping in the build-up on fight night, where Nick Ball's, according to an interview I saw with Manny Robles, Nick Ball's hands were wrapped without a member of Figueroa's team being in there to witness it. Maybe we can get some kind of board clarification on that. So I think that it kind of stems from there. We're also, I've been reliably informed from someone who was watching from ringside by the Figueroa corner throughout. There was plenty of expletives and words going the way of referee Steve Gray throughout that fight about his performance and him going. So there's a lot of stuff. There was a kind of melting pot of emotions there, and it very nearly got out of hand. And after that member of the Figueroa team going across to gesticulate and celebrate, stepping over the line, no doubt, Andrew Kane, who'd fought and won earlier on the night, and Brad Strand, who'd fought earlier on the night, they both came into the ring as well to get involved. So it got a bit messy. It could have got out of hand. Thankfully, it didn't. I think there was some coins thrown into the ring as well on the night as well. So it got a bit nasty.
Yeah, I mean, there were things thrown. I think there were drinks being thrown as well. I mean, I think really, from credit to Brandon Figueroa for his post-fight interviews, where he essentially has apologized. He's essentially apologized. He understands that that's not the best look. Brandon Figueroa's team, you know, I've heard from people as well that they were making a lot of noise, making a bit of a nuisance of themselves, would be appearing disrespectful in Liverpool, where Nick Ball is kind of the crowd darling, and everybody around the ring would have been aware of that in terms of Nick Ball's team, and they would have been getting increasingly irate about that behavior. So that when what happened, as in Nick Ball is beaten and these people are jumping into the ring and celebrating while Nick Ball is still down, you can completely understand why members of Nick Ball's team will take exception to that behavior. And again, let's remember what sport we're dealing with here. When tempers are frayed and we're dealing with the fight business, it's not the first time we've seen this sort of thing spill over. Thankfully, it didn't spill over to the extent that we've seen in the past. So credit to anybody who managed to stop that from happening. But there were quite ugly scenes in and around the ring afterwards, which are, to my mind, are just completely avoidable. But you know, you'll have been at ringside and you'll have seen the actions of certain members of certain teams. I've seen it in this country. I've seen it out in America, where you just, what are you doing? Why are you behaving in this manner? Do you think this is giving an advantage to your fighter? So just glad that it stopped when it stopped.
And on that bill earlier on, Andrew came with a remarkable turnaround victory in there, hurt with a couple of body shots. I mean, that, of all the comebacks, to come back from going down twice to body shots, and there were those swiping, sort of almost grazing shots right across the midriff, which are so destructive. Twice in the 8th, he went down to those, and yet came back firing in the 9th to beat Alejandro Gonzalez in a WBC eliminator in the bantamweight division. So it looks like he's going to, well, at least step towards, if not get his shot against Takuma Inoue, the Japanese champion in that weight class. So that's intriguing. And he earned his shot, didn't he? He earned his shot, Matt. Fair play.
Well, I mean, we love a topsy-turvy thriller in the sport of boxing. When you see a fighter go down twice from body shots and then get up to win in the next round, that's unheard of almost. Going down, getting buzzed from a headshot and then regaining your senses and coming back, but going down like that from body shots, 99 times out of 100, what follows is the fighter who's dropped from the body shots is stopped because they've got nothing left. It's taken all of the wind out of their sails. So for Kane to come back in the way that he did, just incredible. It was like I think they went to Carl Frampton, didn't they? Just shortly afterwards, after the break or whatever, they came back to Carl Frampton. And he's still like, yeah, I'm not ready to talk about anything yet. I just can't believe that that's just happened. It was sensational.
Rocky moment, wasn't it? Rocky moment. And Jack Turner got his 13th knockout in 14 on that bill as well. He won in 3 rounds. Still a bit gung-ho and wild, isn't he? I think he needs just a little more seasoning before he pushes on to a title. But where are the challenges, I suppose? I mean, domestically, you got Scotland, Edinburgh's Matty McHale, who was the Commonwealth champion. He's going to fight for the British title against Casey Kademi in March. That's the vacant British super flyweight title. So Matty McHale, Casey Kademi, maybe Jack Turner could get in the mix. I think he just needs a little more seasoning before he pushes on. But you know what it's like in the lighter weights, Matt? When you're getting to sort of 13, 14 fights and you're on the run that he's on, you are almost duty bound to be pushing for titles. But I would just like to see a little more seasoning for him. But it looks like he's in the wrong weight. I mean, he is massive, isn't he, compared to those other sort of 114 pounders at Superfly?
I really like Jack Turner. I really enjoy watching him fight. He packs some serious power into those gloves.
Yeah.
But he'll come undone if he continues to fight like that as he moves up. He will. And it's I can completely understand the way he fights. It's the curse of the puncher, isn't it? You just get too drunk on your own power. You get too reliant on your own power. And why wouldn't you when pretty much everybody you're hitting is falling at your feet? But ultimately you will encounter someone who will not fall so easily. And then that's when you need to have a serious draw of lessons from which you can learn from in a difficult fight. And I think that difficult fight is approaching for Jack Turner if he continues to fight in that manner.
Make sure you check out our bonus pod, Reece Lynch in Conversation. That's available right now, so go and check that out. You had a chance to hear it yet, Matt?
I haven't heard the latest one, no. I haven't heard the latest one.
Yeah, he's good. He's good. As ever, really honest, open, happy to talk about everything. So we're hoping that series with Reece and also Jermaine Leweya, we'll get him back on the pod in the next few weeks. That sort of prospect series, The Prospect, we're hoping it's going to be a glimpse into the business of boxing as much as it is a glimpse into the behind the scenes of what it's like to be a fighter, sort of making their way through the sport. So we're discussing everything. And this week, the sort of big discussion point was sparring. He's been down sparring Pierce O'Leary. So go listen. If you haven't, go and listen to that. And I try and sort of get to the heart of all of that, the mentality, the mindset, thinking about Tris Dixon's book and all of that stuff, how much sparring you should do. So we go in deep on that. And as ever, he's a really good talker. He's a natural and he's good conversation. So go and listen to that. This weekend, Marco Huck's back. Goodness me. Marco Huck is back in action in, in a 10-rounder. Marco Huck, who it's nearly a decade ago, he was fighting sort of Usyk and Bradis. 2017, 2018. Anyway, he's back. F.A. Jagba's on that Zuffa bill as well. That's on Sunday. And on Sunday, I'm going down to Brentwood for a Johnny Clark Top Tier show where there's a guy called Tiago Muxanga is in action. He's good to watch. Look out for him. And Lily Winch back in action as well. She's a good operator. So that'll be on DAZN. All of that coming up later on at the weekend. Coming up next is This Week. And this week, we take you back to 2003. It's the 15th of March. It's Caesar's Palace. Yeah, baby. It's long-standing titleist at bantamweight Tim Austin against Rafael Marquez. And Matt knows I've got a soft spot for Rafa, don't you?
I do. When you sent this one through, I thought, no, we've done this before. We must have done this one before, but we haven't. We definitely haven't.
We haven't. No, we haven't. Tim Austin, I mean, the Cincinnati kid, I mean, he's defending this IBF bantamweight title, Matt, for the 10th time. There will be some who've never seen him fight, don't necessarily know him as one of the guys around that time, but he didn't have any of the big fights, did he? You know, he didn't fight sort of Tapia or Ayala, guys who banged heads. Junior Jones, I suppose, was in the mix around then as well. But he didn't fight any of those guys. But he did fight Rafa Marquez, and he could have gone the other way. He could have easily gone the other way. He could have lost on this night, Rafael Marquez, but he's probably the fight that made him and allowed him then to go on, push on, become a long-standing champion himself, and then go on to the fights that really made him against Israel Vazquez. Sadly late Israel Vazquez.
Yeah, it really is a kind of a coming out moment for Rafael Marquez, and it must be really now when Tim Austin looks back on it as quite a depressing point in Austin's career. 1992 Olympic bronze medalist. He tried to get to the Olympics in 1988. He'd failed at the US trials. He'd been a champion since 1997. Only had 10 fights in the previous 6 years. And you watch this fight and you look at who he'd been fighting to kind of retain that championship status. And Marquez, by some distance, is the best fighter. And you just think if he'd have been fighting better opponents, then maybe he could have seen this one through. Maybe he could have not fallen into the trap that he fell in the 8th round. But there's an interview with Boxing News in 2020 or 2019 with Tim Austin, and he looks back and he says it wasn't for the want of trying. He says the amount of times I was saying I want Johnny Tapia and they couldn't pin Tapia down. He was reaching out for Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao didn't want to know. And he said, Don King, I was with Don King at this point, but he wasn't really interested in me. He was interested in Tito Trinidad. He was interested in whatever was going on with Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis. He's just doing all he's not interested in me. He said, in all the years that I was with Don King, I had one phone call from him, a solitary phone call that I was with him. And he estimated that throughout his career, he had made the sum of $500,000.
Wow.
That's his entire career. And on the surface, you go 500. Well, what could I do with $500,000? But break that down, and you're probably talking about $30,000 a year salary or something along like that.
Well, that's not even 50,000 for his 10 defenses of the IBF title. It's not even 50 grand each one for that, which is madness when you think about it. And particularly, Matt, when you think of where he came from, as you say, in the 92 Barca Olympics, he medaled in an Olympic team that included Oscar De La Hoya, Vernon Forrest, Chris Bird. He was on that team.
Yeah.
And it does make you think. It does make you wonder about, is there a disconnect in American amateur boxing, stroke professional boxing more recently? Shakur came out of Rio, but those American Olympians who go on to become notable boxing stars, they are thinner on the ground these days, aren't they? And yet you go back to 88, Roy, 92, you know, further back, Foreman, Ali. I mean, it's just a conveyor belt of stars. Conveyor belt, or was.
Yeah, it was, and I also think that Tim Austin is disadvantaged by his size. You know, the marketplace in America for super bantamweights, they're not that interested, and I remember it must have been around the time where Deontay Wilder was kind of in the Olympics in 2008, was it? And he'd been
Yeah.
the first American to come out of the Olympics with a medal for quite a while in one of the bigger weight classes. And people in America are saying back in the 60s and 70s, everyone that's like is clearly going to be thickly set and big built, and it's going to be a physical unit to be reckoned with. They want to be the world heavyweight champion. They're looking at George Foreman, Joe Frazier, Muhammad Ali. They want to be the world heavyweight champion. Fast forward 30 years, all they want to do is play basketball or go to NFL. It's just it's more lucrative for them, or they can see a route into those sports that is going to be far easier than trying to map your way to be the world heavyweight champion. And all of the kind of the really like physically gifted kids were being pointed in different directions. They wouldn't be going anywhere near a boxing gym.
Do you know, I'll have to dig out my notes from that 2008 Olympics, because I remember that Zhang was in that 2008 Olympics as well. That super heavies, my notes on that super heavy competition. There was hardly anyone in it. So you pretty much just had to turn up, win a fight, and you were going to medal. But yeah, I remember my notes being quite disparaging about the prospects of those super heavies, and look what they went on to do. Interestingly, do you know what, Matt? I don't think Tim Austin should have lost this fight, and my reading of it is it's really fascinating, because you look at the length of Tim Austin, and you look at how difficult Rafa Marquez is finding to get close. And actually, when you watch their feet, actually the front foot of both of them, they're almost touching. So the feet are close enough. But because Tim Austin's so long, he can lean quite far back. And so his feet are in range, but his body and her head are so far back. And he fights on the back foot anyway. He's got such long levers. He can control you with a jab. The left hand is always there as the danger. And because you're struggling to get close, Rafa Marquez is just worried about getting clocked with this big left hand. And he does get clocked with it as early as the first minute a couple of times, where Austin comes out firing, really quite aggressive and quite positive. So Marquez is just struggling. He's really struggling. He has a good fourth round where he kind of hurts or makes things uncomfortable for Austin. But before that and then afterwards, Austin just controls the distance. And then we get to sort of round 5, round 6. He's really good. 6, he's just controlled the pace. Looks like he's kind of got this in his pocket. And then in between the 6th and the 7th rounds, you got Aaron Snowell again in the corner. The same Aaron Snowell who 13 years earlier had been in the Mike Tyson corner for the Buster Douglas defeat famously. But the same Aaron Snowell who 4 years later in 94 helped engineer the Frankie Randall shock victory over Julio Cesar Chavez, which we discussed on the pod a few weeks ago. So you've got all this conflict. But in this fight, I think you've got some of the worst of Snowell, because the advice on the back of those two controlling, really clever rounds from Tim Austin, he's got the fight in the palm of his hand. He's doing everything he needs to do. Marquez is struggling. He's behind. Nacho Berenstein, who's in the corner of Marquez, is reading the riot act round after round after round. You can hear through the interpreter the consternation and the frustration in that Marquez corner. And then you've got Snowell in the 6th round, before the 7th, saying to Tim Austin, after controlling the last few rounds, probably he's won 4 of 6, probably. Fight him, bang him, get him in the trenches. And then at the end of the 7th, he says and shouts as much to Marquez as he does to Tim Austin. It won't be long now. It won't be long now. Bang with him, he says. I mean, just some of the worst advice I think you can hear in a corner. Talk about not reading the room. I mean, come on. Everything he was doing was working. Why are you asking him to go and do something else? And it comes unstuck.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a hefty portion of my notes dedicated to that. And I did focus because Austin, I thought Marquez was okay in the 6th, but Austin had a really good control in 7th to the point where Marquez is starting to look a little bit lost. And yeah, you have Snell come out and he's like, it won't be long now. It won't be long now, which, as you have identified, was in complete contrast to Nacho Berestein in the other corner, who you could, given what then would transpire in the 8th, you could compare Berestein to Angelo Dundee. You're blowing it, son. Berestein is very much, I do not know what you're trying to do. Yeah. It's not working. It is not working. And then what happens? You have Austin go out trying to impress his trainer because he's being told that Marquez is about to be stopped. Austin puts his foot on the pedal, and he has some success. He tags Marquez, completely overestimates how hurt Marquez, I think, is. And before we know it, in the space of about 30 seconds, it's Austin who's in trouble. And as we know, it's Austin who will end up losing the fight in that round and losing his title and never really coming close to the top of the world again.
It's the one that got away, isn't it? I think this is the kind of fight that would haunt you for years afterwards. Maybe still think about it now, to be honest. I think it's got to be that kind of fight for Tim Austin because he was controlling it, he was winning it, and he really did hurt Marquez at the start of that 8th round with 2.5 minutes to go. Marquez backs off to the ropes. Austin goes after him, and Marquez just fights off the ropes, fights back. What we'd come to expect of him in those stirring wars against Israel Vasquez. Exactly that from Marquez. Hurtable, hittable, but always dangerous. Always dangerous with that wicked right hand of his and that sort of that really traditional boxing shape, orthodox boxing shape that both he and his brother had in spades. And there's just so many punches, but right hands, combinations. It's a sequence of those that puts Tim Austin down, and he just doesn't recover. And Marquez goes after him, doesn't he? There's about 1.5 minutes left on the clock, or thereabouts, when he goes down. And then he just goes after him until about 40 seconds left. And then Vic Drakulic, the referee, steps in and it's all over. And it come from behind win from Marquez on a difficult night, but the kind of nights you need to win to get to where you want to get to. And he got there.
He did. And we know what happened next for Marquez. A bit of a cult hero, a Steed favourite.
Love him.
You know,
I love everything about him. Everything about him. I love the look. He almost looks more sort of traditional American Indian than he does Mexican, doesn't he, Marquez? I love his shape. I love the look. I love the fact that he's kind of in the shadow of his brother Juan Manuel, who, by the way, was a year away from kind of the fight that started his legend. He's a year away from the draw with Pacquiao. That was in the following year after this. But I sort of a little bit underdog mentality, I think, with me, with Marquez. There's a little bit of that with my sort of appreciation of him.
Poor old Tim Austin, though. Poor old Tim Austin. You know, he was, shortly after this, he was charged with rape. He was cleared. But within that interview that you can see on the Boxing News website, he's saying that just changed everything for him. The people that had known him for many, many years started to question his character, even though he was cleared. He says by the time he came back, and I think he came back about 2 years later, He said his heart just wasn't in. His heart just wasn't in it anymore. These days, he does a lot of charity work. He's a chef. He will feed the homeless. And yeah, he looks back on his career and he says he remembers the days when a young Adrian Broner would be coming into the gym and saying, I want to be just like Tim Austin when I grow up. And Tim Austin said, well, Adrian Broner, by the time he grew up and was throwing money down toilets, couldn't have been further away from Tim Austin. But yeah, he was a good fighter. You could see it in this fight, Tim Austin, and you do just wonder, maybe with a different promoter, maybe if he'd have been a stone or two heavier, where could he have gone? Because as you said, and you identified right at the start of this section, people don't talk about Tim Austin anymore, do they? But the vast majority of people, even fans, don't remember Tim Austin. But for a time, he had tremendous potential.
Hard to beat fighter as well, and he could have been even harder to beat, I think, with the right sort of, right sort of advice, right sort of approach. He would have been so difficult to beat, Tim Austin, on a night when really he probably shouldn't have lost against Rafa Marquez, but this is a fight that launched Marquez forward. He'd have 7 defenses of the title in the next 3 years, 5 stoppages in those 7 defenses. And then it would be 4 years later that he'd bump into Israel Vasquez for the first time, stopping him, or Vasquez pulled out because of the nose injury by Freddie Roach. People thinking that Vasquez quit. Vasquez quitting. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? And they'd go on, of course, to have that 4-fight series. Oh, really? We only consider it a 3-fight series, but the Rafa Marquez backers probably consider all 4 as he evened it up in the finale. A few weeks away, Matt, from Roy Jones Jr. creating his own bit of history on March the 1st. A few weeks after this, a couple of weekends after this, he'd beat John Ruiz for the heavyweight title. And then the week after that, Corey Sanders would dispatch and destroy Vladimir Klitschko, the fight that would, of course, force a turnaround in Klitschko's career. All of that coming up around this time in boxing history. The week of Tim Austin against Rafael Marquez. Go watch, enjoy that. Follow, subscribe the Opening Bell Pod on your usual platforms. Patreon for less than $5 a month if you can support us, and we will speak to you again next week. Bye bye. Take care.